The decision to send 7th Corps did not sound at first like the beginning of a great armored offensive. It came in the language of deployments, reinforcements, and options, the careful vocabulary governments use when war has not yet fully arrived. But beneath that language was a hard military truth. The coalition in Saudi Arabia had become strong enough to discourage an Iraqi drive south, yet it was not yet built to smash the Iraqi army out of Kuwait. If the crisis was going to move from shield to sword, the United States needed more than aircraft, marines, light forces, and scattered heavy units. It needed a mailed fist, and that fist was waiting in Europe. If you would like to move beyond the podcast, you can see my available books at militaryauthor.me. And at trackpads.com, you will find magazines and galleries with hundreds of thousands of photos and videos to explore. 7th Corps was not a fresh invention for the Gulf. It was one of the great Cold War formations of the United States Army, stationed in Germany for the nightmare everyone had trained for but hoped never to see, a Soviet-led armored assault into Western Europe. Its soldiers knew the language of heavy mechanized war. Its brigades had practiced moving tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery, engineers, scouts, fuel trucks, and command posts across crowded terrain under the imagined pressure of enemy armor and air attack. For decades, the Corps had been part of a deterrent, a warning to Moscow that any drive west would meet American steel. In late 1990, that Cold War weapon was about to be lifted from Germany and carried to the desert. President George H.W. Bush's decision to send major reinforcements changed the emotional weight of the crisis. Until then, Desert Shield had been about preventing the next disaster. Afterward, it became clear that the coalition was preparing for the possibility of reversing the first one. The Iraqi occupation of Kuwait might still end through pressure, sanctions, or diplomacy, but the military balance was being reshaped so that war, if it came, would not be a desperate frontal shove into prepared defenses. It would be a campaign designed to break Iraq's army. Sending 7th Corps signaled that the United States was not merely placing a guard at the gate, it was assembling the strength to go through the gate and finish the fight. The man who would use that strength was General Norman Schwarzkopf, the American commander in the theater, a large and forceful figure with the burden of turning coalition power into a workable campaign. Schwarzkopf understood that Iraq's army could not be wished away. It had occupied Kuwait with speed, dug itself into defensive belts, and held armored reserves behind the lines, including Republican Guard formations that Saddam Hussein trusted more than many regular units. To liberate Kuwait, the coalition had to do more than enter the country. It had to defeat the Iraqi forces that could counterattack, delay, or escape to fight again. That requirement pushed the campaign toward a massive western envelopment, a movement into the open desert, and then eastward against Iraq's armored heart. 7th Corps was chosen as the main punch for that plan because it brought weight, depth, and a particular kind of armored competence. Heavy divisions are not elegant instruments. They are enormous, hungry, noisy, and difficult to move. But when organized and supplied properly, they can deliver a blow that lighter forces cannot. Their tanks can survive punishment that would shatter thin-skinned vehicles. Their mechanized infantry can clear ground and protect armor from threats tanks cannot handle alone. Their artillery can reach beyond the immediate fight, while engineers open lanes, bridge gaps, and defeat obstacles. Their cavalry can screen ahead, find the enemy, and keep the larger force from stumbling blind into danger. This was the kind of machine 7th Corps represented. At the center of the Corps stood Lieutenant General Frederick M. Franks, Jr., a commander whose own body carried the cost of war. He had lost part of a leg in Vietnam, returned to service, and risen through the armored force with a deep seriousness about training, preparation, and the lives of soldiers. Franks inherited not a simple assignment, but a problem of movement on a scale most listeners can barely picture. He had to take a corps designed for Central Europe, move it across continents, adapt it to Arabia, and prepare it for a campaign that would demand speed in empty terrain rather than defensive battle along German roads and towns. His challenge was not just to command tanks, it was to transform a Cold War army into a desert strike force. That transformation began with the units themselves. The 1st Armored Division and 3rd Armored Division brought heavy tank power. The 1st Infantry Division, though called infantry, was mechanized and carried its soldiers in armored vehicles with tanks, artillery, and engineers of its own. The 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment, a hard-trained formation from Germany, would serve as the Corps cavalry, moving ahead of the main body like a searching hand extended into the darkness. Later, the British 1st Armored Division would also fight under the Corps' direction, adding another seasoned armored force to the coalition's heaviest command. These were not pieces placed on a board. They were living organizations, each with habits, leaders, rivalries, strengths, and limits that had to be made to work together. For the soldiers in Germany, the order to deploy must have felt like history turning under their boots. The enemy they had studied for years was not the one they would face. The villages and forests of Europe were replaced by sand, rock, and horizon. The possibility of fighting under nuclear-shadowed Cold War conditions gave way to a regional war under television cameras and global scrutiny. Yet much of their training still mattered. Gunnery, maintenance discipline, radio procedure, battle drills, combined arms coordination, and the ability to move under orders without waiting for perfect clarity were not European skills alone. They were armored warfare skills. The desert would change the setting, but it would not change the need for crews who trusted their equipment, commanders who understood tempo, and units that could keep fighting while moving. Sending 7th Corps also raised the stakes for Saddam Hussein. A light American presence could be described as a tripwire or a defensive gesture. A heavy corps from Europe was something different. It suggested that the coalition was preparing to meet Iraqi armor with heavier armor, not merely contain it from the air or nibble at the edges. This mattered politically because the decision narrowed the space between threat and action. It also mattered militarily because it gave the coalition options. Once 7th Corps arrived, Schwarzkopf could imagine more than a costly attack straight into Kuwait's prepared defenses. He could imagine holding Iraqi attention in the east while sending powerful armored forces far out to the west, around the exposed flank, and then turning them east like a door swinging shut. That western movement would later become famous as the left hook, but in late 1990, it was still an idea that depended on hard realities. Could heavy units move so far through desert without losing direction or cohesion? Could fuel keep up with the tanks? Could commanders maintain contact across wide spaces? Could reconnaissance find Iraqi formations before the main body collided with them? Could the coalition preserve surprise when moving an army this large? The answer to all of those questions would depend on planning and execution, not slogans. A bold plan in armored warfare is only boldness until the supply columns fail. Then it becomes wreckage. 7th Corps gave Schwarzkopf power, but power had to be carried, fed, repaired, and steered. The decision also marked a step in the long evolution of tank warfare. At Cambrai in 1917, tanks had been used to rupture a trench system, crude machines trying to solve the deadlock of wire and machine guns. By 1940, armored forces could become engines of operational collapse when tied to radios, aircraft, and fast-moving infantry. By 1990, the question had changed again. Could a modern armored corps, using thermal sights, digitalizing command habits only in their early forms, precise air support, long-range artillery, and disciplined combined arms, find and destroy another armored army across open desert faster than that enemy could understand what was happening? 7th Corps was not just being sent to add numbers. It was being sent to test the mature form of late 20th century mechanized warfare. None of this made victory automatic. Iraqi forces had real weapons, prepared defenses, and the advantage of already being in theater. The Republican Guard was not 10 feet tall, as later myths sometimes made it, but neither was it an illusion. Its units could kill, delay, and punish mistakes. A sandstorm, a navigational error, a traffic jam, a breach delayed under fire, or a command failure could turn a fast campaign into something slower and bloodier. The decision to send 7th Corps therefore carried risk as well as confidence. It meant putting a massive part of America's best armored force into a theater where the whole world would watch the result. If the Corps failed, the failure would not be hidden. The most important thing about Bush sending 7th Corps is that it changed the coming war from a defensive standoff into a campaign of decision. Desert Shield had bought time. 7th Corps gave that time weight. It brought the formations that would conduct the main armored attack, the cavalry that would ride ahead into the storm, and the commanders who would have to turn movement into battlefield shock. Months later, at places named by grid lines and objectives rather than old villages, that decision would become visible in burning vehicles, prisoners moving to the rear, and American formations pushing east faster than the Iraqi command system could bear. The road to 73 Easting did not begin with a gunner seeing a target. It began when the United States reached back to its Cold War armored army and sent it to the Gulf.
You've been listening to Famous Tank Battles. These battles were never just about machines. They were about doctrine, terrain, firepower, logistics, and the hard problem of turning shock into victory. For more military history writing and books, visit militaryauthor.me. And for magazines, podcasts, and a massive archive of military photos and video, visit trackpads.com. Thanks for listening.